We're delighted to have Mr. Mark Clifford, the Executive Director of Asia Business Council, the former editor of SCMP, South China Morning Post, and the Asia Regional Editor of Business Week. Mr. Clifford, may I invite you to come on stage and to lead the session.
Well, thank you very much. Delighted to see everybody back. Thank you for your patience. We're going to finish the morning up with a very special session because, as I think all of you know, there are two streams for the next couple of days. One is relating to buildings, particularly the opportunities in green buildings, and the other to electric vehicles and all the opportunities and challenges there. This is the only session where we're fortunate enough to have two speakers, one from each of the streams. And we also have a special representative from Sao Paulo, which is going to be the host of the next C40 summit next May and June. So I'd like to start off with buildings, and I have the very distinct pleasure of welcoming Bob LiMandri, who is Commissioner of the Buildings Department in New York City. And as many of you heard this morning when Mayor Bloomberg spoke, New York has made terrific, really world-class progress in the last few years in terms of taking its existing building stock, making it more energy efficient, and also creating jobs in the process. So I'd like to welcome Bob up to the stage, and we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Good morning. So did you get your morning tea and your biscuit? So we've got two streams today, and what I'd like to do is talk about existing buildings. My name is Robert LiMandri. I'm the Buildings Commissioner in New York City. And what that means in New York City is that I'm in charge of the building code, to enforce the building code and the regulations for construction and also existing buildings, how they're being used. In many of your jurisdictions, it's similar, and there's sometimes some overlap. But it's really a distinct honor and privilege to be here today with you. This is a place where we can get together. Many of us who run large cities in government have the same kinds of issues every day. And I think that many of you today will walk out of the room with some questions. Some may have some answers, and some may decide how you're going to tackle the problem at home. And what I'd like to do today is share with you our experience and how that might help you. And I certainly hope that later on today or tomorrow, I can bump into you and you can tell me and give me some feedback. You know, one of the things that we realize is that, you know, several years ago, many other cities have done the same thing, where we came up with a plan. And the plan was to make our cities more livable so that people will continue to come to those cities and want to live there. And Mayor Bloomberg talked about how, for example, to have a park within 10 minutes. You know, that's something that new moms want to have. That's something that older people want to have. You know, but that is just one piece of the whole pie. Many of us here today are to talk about how we can reduce our carbon footprint. Ours happens to be 30% by 2030. So you immediately go to the question of, well, like, how am I going to do that? And what we did was we looked at where the emissions were coming from. And as you heard this morning, several mayors in the room said it's coming from buildings. And so I'm going to share with you the road that we took on this area. We have nearly 1 million buildings in New York City today. And 75% of our carbon emissions come from buildings. And we have a regulatory program that I'm going to talk about that deals directly with those buildings, public and private. By 2030, we expect, and you may have heard the mayor say it himself, we expect that more than 90% of those buildings will be in existence by 2030. So looking just at new construction isn't going to cut it and is not going to create this rapid adoption of getting this carbon footprint down. So we're like 5 cities in one. Many of your cities are the same. So I always talk about how I love the New York Yankees because they're in the Bronx. And that usually doesn't go over so well in my homeland because there's another team called the Mets. But they reside in the Bronx. And in the Bronx, we have a series of mid-rise development. 6 stories, brick. But our building stock isn't just that. We have high-rises, which we're all familiar with from the New York skyline and Wall Street. We have small 1- and 2-family homes, like many suburban areas, like in Staten Island and Queens. And in Brooklyn, we actually have industrial buildings as well as brownstones. But what we need to do is we need to look at all of them and figure out how we can get to the answer. So what we did was we looked at where the space is. How many buildings deal with the space? And so we looked at the land value, and we looked at, for example, on this graph towards the bottom right, you can see that 1.85% of all buildings actually have 50% of all the square footage, in our language, square meters, of the space. So it directly took us to those buildings. They happen to be the largest buildings in New York, and guess what? They actually correlate to 45% of all the energy usage. So, an aha moment, if I will. It directed us to move forward to look at how can we deal with these directly. So, to put it in a backdrop, there are several ways. Some of the mayors talked about it today. There are several ways to move cities forward. So there's voluntary compliance, LEED certification, and many of you have subscribed to Green Buildings Council. But that's not a regulatory requirement. That's not a requirement that you must. That's you might, or you see some value in it. There's incentive-based, which is I'll give you some tax breaks. I'll provide some revolving loan funds. I'll encourage you to move forward. But what we're talking about today is to require people to do things and requiring them to raise the standards. We have a building code, and we're raising the standards across the board for all buildings. And then in addition, we are strategically placing and looking at those buildings that take the most energy, because we think that that will have the most impact in the least amount of time. So that's our Greener, Greater Buildings plan. And specifically, it's 4 pieces of legislation that were passed by the Speaker and the Mayor and the City Council, requiring people to move forward in this area. And I'm going to talk about all 4 of them. Specifically, the first one, benchmarking. This is a requirement that says if you're in a building, a city building, because we all have to lead by example, right? City buildings that are over 10,000 square feet. Also, for buildings that are privately owned, 50,000 square feet, that you must go forward and do an assessment, an annual assessment. And that assessment, we're using a federal tool, which is done by the EPA. That's the federal government in the United States. You have to input information like electrical use, water, gas, oil, what it takes to run that building. Annually, you put that information in, and bingo, you get a number. And that number makes it translatable to the average New Yorker that says, my building is efficient in this way, and this is how I compete against my peers. All of a sudden, if you would, we could take the example. You make it simple enough for everyone to understand. You go out and you want to buy a vehicle, you want to buy a car. What do you look at? You look at price, quality, and MPGs if you're in the United States, which means miles per gallon. How efficient is that car running on petrol? So the point is that we need to do the same thing for buildings, and this is the vehicle to do it. And a goal is that we get people that are tenants and landlords to start to talk about energy use. Because one of the primary issues that we need to do is we need to align people's business interest. The second is energy auditing. Every 10 years, you need to do an in-depth analysis and look at that building and find out, can you do some capital repairs, modernizations, and can you get a payback? And if you can't, can you optimally look at that building and tweak a few things and get the energy usage down? And I can guarantee you that that is possible. If you've ever run a building like I have, things happen. We're looking at things like envelope, HVAC, the heating, ventilation, air conditioning system, the lighting, all the ideas to be able to translate to savings. again, to get business aligned, tenants and landlords. And you'll hear me talk about this over and over again. Lighting is another example. As a real estate guy, I'll tell you that in New York City, we do a thing called a paint and carpet lease. You know what that is? That's like we paint and carpet and we release it. We don't do anything else. You like the space? She goes, no. He goes, no. I want different colors. Fine, we'll paint it for you. We'll put carpet down. Guess what? We never look at anything else. So the idea there is, and this is moving on me, I must be slow, and this is, the idea is that what we want to do is we want them to look at the fastest payback that you can get in New York City today, which is lighting. Go up to the ceiling, replace the fixtures, do the ballast, whatever it is, and we think that this is going to be a huge savings because we know that we need to encourage business to move forward. Giving them the incentive, we're giving them a period of time that they need to, as those leases roll over, again aligning business interest, when the lease rolls over, look at the lighting, change the lighting out, and everybody wins. The landlord wins, the tenant wins, and the city wins. Also, you can't just look at lighting. One of the other concepts that we have, which many people have most likely, is that sub-metering is a part of a way to get people to change their behavior. But if you get blended with everybody else in the building and you pay some flat rate, do you turn off the lights? Do you turn off the computers? Do you even care? The point is that, this should slow down, is that what we want to do is we want to sub-meter each of those spaces. And the idea is to get people to change their behavior. So here again, by 2025, every space over a certain amount of square feet needs to be sub-metered. Again, it changes business interest. It gets people to do something different. And this is the way you're going to make change globally for the long term.